And Christopher Hope.
In just one moment, Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, and Rishi Sunak, the leader of the opposition, go head-to-head at PMQs. We'll have full coverage of every moment, every spit and cough from the chamber, and getting full reaction from Labour MP for Plymouth Moor View, forgive me, Fred Thomas, and Shadow Leader of the House of Commons, Chris Philp.
Straight to you now, Chris Philp, as the Conservative representative. Imagine you are the leader of the opposition, you're Rishi Sunak. What are you going to go on today?
Well, I don't have any inside information, but I think I would go on the rumoured increase to employers' national insurance. As the IFS said yesterday, it is a flagrant breach of Labour's manifesto promise not to increase national insurance. It's a tax on jobs. It'll make it less likely companies hire, and it will take money out of the pockets of ordinary working people, according to previous OBR analysis. That was the same question, of course, which he asked last week, didn't he? And got the whole story running on employers' national insurance. Fred, what's the answer going to be? The budget's 2 weeks away. Stop asking about it.
We've promoted you to Prime Minister.
Yeah, as you'd expect, we're not going to be able to reveal anything about the budget at this stage. But what I would say is we're absolutely committed to honouring our manifesto pledges, which was not to raise taxes on working people. So that means we're not raising national insurance, we're not raising VAT, and we're not raising income tax. And that's the really important thing to remember. We're honouring our pledges.
Fred, I should say that in the chamber now, there's lots of pink because it's Breast Cancer Awareness Day, Gloria. That's why you're seeing the chamber there. Chris Bryant.
Chris Bryant is Department of Science and Technology questions, which is immediately before Prime Minister's questions, of course. As soon as it starts, we go right to you. That was the manifesto commitment, say Labour. It was not to increase taxes on working people for the duration of this Parliament?
Well, first of all, it said in black and white, we will not increase national insurance. It didn't draw a distinction between employers and employees. On this ridiculous working people sort of loophole they're trying to winkle out, Rachel Reeves herself, about 2 years ago, when Rishi Sunak tried to do the same thing, thankfully since reversed, she said that this was a tax on working people. So Rachel Reeves' own analysis of this tax rise says that it's a tax on working people. They've really got nowhere to go here. It is a straightforward, black and white breach of a manifesto promise, and the public are going to feel like they were lied to during the election campaign.
They are, Fred. It is a problem having a budget so far. 16 weeks after the election means we're talking about it 2 weeks ahead of it happening, and you're being accused of lying already.
Well, I think you just laid out 16 weeks after an election is, in the grand scheme of things, very, very little. And Chris mentions how the public feel. What the public feel is that they're hard up against it, that the economy was crashed by an absolutely reckless mini-budget from the last Conservatives when they were in power. We are still fighting that fight to try and get this country back on its feet. There will be some tough decisions, of course, in the budget. Everyone expects that. What exactly those will look like, clearly, we can't say at this point.
Well, hang on a sec. We've got inflation down to 2%, down to target. The growth in the UK economy is the highest in the G7 this year, and unemployment is half what it was, 4%, half what it was under the last Labour government. So that is not a terrible economic legacy, and anyone who claims to the contrary is trying to mislead the public.
We're looking out, Chamber. Over to the Chamber now.
A monumental figure in Scottish and UK politics. He leaves a lasting legacy, and I know that the deepest condolences of the whole House are with Moira, his family and his loved ones. Mr. Speaker, this week we also remember our colleague and friend, Sir David Amess, whose kindness and commitment to public service continues to inspire us all. And I know how deeply this was felt on the benches opposite, and I'm so glad that his plaque is here in the House with us. I also want to acknowledge the extraordinary life of Holocaust survivor Lily Ebbert, whose message of hope showed such courage. May her memory be a blessing. Mr. Speaker, we also extend our sympathies to the family of General Sir Mike Jackson. He was an inspirational leader of the British Army and served with distinction. Mr. Speaker, I know the whole House will join me in wishing the best of luck to the new England manager, Thomas Tuchel. I won't hold his old job against him, but I wish him well in the new one. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my duties in this House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
Dr. Donichens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In last week's maternity services debate, we heard of the devastating impact of the removal of consultant-led maternity services from a hospital. Now, under the previous government's unfunded new hospital programme, there were proposals to remove consultant-led maternity services from our hospital in Winchester. Could the Prime Minister reassure me and my constituents that under the new government that consultant-led maternity services and A&E services will remain in Winchester, and will he commit to funding properly the backlog of maintenance that has developed in our hospital in Winchester?
Well, I thank him for raising this very important issue and for championing the voices of women in his constituency. We are committed to ensuring that all women and babies receive safe, compassionate and personalised care through pregnancy, birth and critical following months. Reconfiguration of the services, as he knows, is a matter for the integrated care boards, important as it allows decisions to be made locally and tailored to local interests. But all changes should be based on evidence, clinically led, and involve engagement with patients to ensure they'll deliver better outcomes. It's a very important issue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whitby Interactive has provided inclusive play schemes and holiday activities for children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities for 26 years. It has been a lifeline for families continually failed by Conservative governments. But Interactive is set to close due to a funding shortfall. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that action to tackle the crisis in SEND provision is urgently needed, and that charities like Interactive deserve our support more than ever?
Yes, I do, and I know this will be a concerning time for families who rely on the brilliant work of Whitby Interactive. Children with special educational needs and disabilities have been failed for too long, and this comes up repeatedly in this House, with parents struggling to get their children the support that they need and that they deserve. We must raise the standards for every child so they can succeed in education. We will fix the foundations, Mr. Speaker, and ensure every child can achieve their potential.
Leader of the Opposition, Rishi Sunak.
Can I join with the Prime Minister's words of tribute to Alex Salmond and the Holocaust survivor Lily Ebbert, and thank him for his kind words about Sir David Amess. We remember him fondly, and we will be thinking of all their families at this moment. Mr. Speaker, this week China has carried out unwarranted, aggressive and intimidatory military exercises in the Taiwan Strait. Our allies are rightly concerned. After worrying reports that the government may have intervened to stop a visit to the UK by the former Taiwanese president, can the Prime Minister confirm that the Foreign Secretary will use his meetings in Beijing this week to condemn China's dangerous escalatory acts in the Strait?
I thank him for his question. The continued military activity in the Strait is not conducive to peace and stability in the Taiwan Straits is in all of our interest. On the wider point that he raises, we will cooperate where we can as permanent members of the UN Security Council, issues like net zero, health and trade, compete where we have different interests, but challenge, the point he makes is absolutely right, where it's needed, to protect national security, human rights and our values, and we will put that challenge in.
Well, given what the Prime Minister said, and I agree, of course we must engage, but we should use that engagement for our national interests. I hope that the Foreign Secretary will unequivocally condemn this military escalation and stand up for democracy in Taiwan. Now, the whole House will be concerned about the fate of the democracy campaigner Jimmy Lai. He is a British citizen who has been wrongly imprisoned in Hong Kong for 4 years. The previous government pressured China for his release. Does the Prime Minister agree that this is a politically motivated prosecution and that it is a breach of China's legal obligations to Hong Kong under the Sino-British Declaration?
Yes, and this case, as he will understand, is a priority for the government. We do call on the Hong Kong authorities to release immediately our British national, and the Foreign Secretary raised this case in his first meeting with China's Foreign Minister, and we will continue to do so.
I thank the Prime Minister for that answer. Now, China, as he knows, has become a decisive enabler of Russia's war against Ukraine, supplying the vast majority now of Russia's imported military microelectronics and components, worsening the suffering of the Ukrainian people. So can the Prime Minister confirm that he is prepared to sanction any Chinese business or individual involved in aiding Russia's invasion of Ukraine, including secondary sanctions on financial institutions?
Yes, and we've called for that in the past. We continue to do so, and I hope this is an issue where we can have unity across the House.
Yes, I can assure the Prime Minister of his support. It is something that we began. The United States recently have expanded their sanctions, and I hope that the new government will continue to look at doing the same. Now, the last government also established a new system of registration and monitoring to protect the UK from interference from foreign states, including China, Russia and Iran. Called the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme, it was described as essential by MI5 in the fight to help keep Britain safe. But since the Prime Minister took office, he has halted its implementation. Why?
That isn't correct.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that is very clearly what the government has said. And only last week he said at the dispatch box that he would give the security forces the powers they need. And if he is going to fulfil that promise, I would urge him to get up to speed on this issue and therefore implement the scheme. Furthermore, Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee have warned that British universities are increasingly a rich feeding ground for China to exert political influence over us. That's why we passed the Freedom of Speech Act with new powers to help defend universities from this threat, but the new Education Secretary has since blocked it. So can the Prime Minister tell us how, without this tool, the government will prevent Chinese influence over our universities?
I really don't think party political points on security and intelligence. Honestly, throughout the last Parliament, we stood with the government on all questions of security and intelligence, because it was important to the outside world that we did so. I worked with the security and intelligence services for 5 years prosecuting cases. I know firsthand the work that they do as a lawyer. I've known firsthand the work they do as the Prime Minister. We support them in everything that we do, and he knows that.
Mr. Speaker, whether it's the FIRST scheme or the Freedom of Speech Act, these were new tools, new sets of powers that the previous government passed in order to give, whether it's our universities or security services, the powers they need to tackle a growing threat. And we will, of course, continue to support the government in protecting our national security, but do believe on this side of the House that those tools are needed and are concerned by reports that the new government has paused their implementation or indeed scrapped them. But finally, Mr. Speaker, the Chinese government has sanctioned multiple members of our parliament for championing human rights. As a result, they have faced intimidation, abuse and surveillance. And Mr. Speaker, I commend you for your defence of the right of every member of this House to speak out on crucial issues without fear of retaliation from foreign states. Now, I know the Prime Minister will agree with that too. So this week, will the Foreign Secretary in his meetings not just raise the issue, but tell the Chinese government to lift those sanctions on our colleagues?
Yes, and we speak with one voice. He speaks about the record of the last government. That record was 14 years of failure. 6 years austerity, 3 years of Brexit logjam, then Johnson Trust and the Leader of the Opposition, utter failure. And this government was elected to do things differently, to make fairer choices, but most importantly to give Britain its future back. So we will fix the foundations, we'll do it with a long-term plan to grow our economy, protect working people and rebuild our country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 years ago, Thurrock Council was led into effective bankruptcy by the then Conservative administration, in no small part due to an investment of hundreds of millions of pounds into a solar farm scheme run by a con man. Given the Prime Minister's commitment to integrity in public life, will he support mine and my constituents' calls for a public inquiry so that those responsible can finally be held to account?
I thank her for her question, because years of underfunding have left councils facing huge budget pressures. They yawn. They don't know the impact it has on working people up and down the country. They rely on public services, and what's happened in Thurrock is shocking. We are committed to resetting the relationship and helping those under intervention to recover and to reform. 14 years is a long time to destroy local services, and it's clear it'll take time to fix them. We will get councils back on their feet by providing multi-year funding settlements. But ultimately, we have to grow our economy, and I'm surprised the Prime Minister didn't welcome the £63 billion of investment that we were able to announce on Monday.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I echo the tributes to the Prime Minister, to Alex Salmond, to Sir David Amess and to Lily Ebbott? And can I welcome the news that ministers are going to review the carers allowance repayment scandal after campaigns by carers organisations, the Guardian newspaper and the Liberal Democrats, culminating in our motion on the order paper today. But will he agree with me that the evidence needed for the review is already long established and many of the decisions self-evident? So will he and his colleagues vote for our motion today so we can write off the overpayments, we can end the crazy cliff edge to the earnings limit now, and have a fuller review for the support that carers deserve?
I thank him for raising this. This is obviously a really important issue affecting a number of people, and that's why we've launched an independent review into the carers allowance overpayments, to look at the circumstances of the overpayments, to see what went wrong and therefore what can be done to put it right, because carers must get the support that they deserve. So I'm grateful for him for raising it. I'm glad that we've been able to take this action today to go forward on a really important issue.
David.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for that answer and ask him that ministers in the review will listen to the voices of carers throughout. Can I turn to the Middle East now? Israeli Finance Minister Smotrich had said that starving 2 million people in Gaza might be justified and moral. National Security Minister Ben-Gvir called settlers who killed a 19-year-old on the West Bank heroes. After my visit to Israel and Palestine last February, having witnessed the damage that these extremist ministers in the Netanyahu government are doing, I called on the last government to sanction them. The last government refused, but we now learn that the former Foreign Secretary was considering this. So will the Prime Minister now sanction Ministers Ben-Gvir and Smotrich?
We are looking at that because they're obviously abhorrent comments, as he rightly says, along with other really concerning activity in the West Bank, but also across the region. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is dire. The death toll has surpassed 42,000, and access to basic services is becoming much harder. And Israel must take all possible steps to avoid civilian casualties, to allow aid into Gaza in much greater volume, and provide the UN and humanitarian partners the ability to operate effectively. Mr. Speaker, along with France, the UK will convene an urgent meeting of the UN Security Council to address this.
Lyndon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been an honour to meet my constituent, Tom Morton, a young person in care who sat in the public gallery today and cares so deeply about politics and communities. Young people in care are at a disproportionate risk of criminal and cynical exploitation by drug barons through county lines. Will the Prime Minister tell Tom and the House what steps the government will take to prevent vulnerable children in care becoming involved in county line operations?
Well, can I welcome Tom to this House? It's encouraging to see young people engaging in democracy. County lines is a real problem, and all of us will have experienced the effect and impact of that in our constituencies. And our County Lines programme focuses on preventing young people being exploited and lured into criminal gangs, which is far too common, and committed to introduce a new offence of child criminal exploitation, long overdue. We will also create a network of young future hubs staffed with professional youth workers, mental health support workers and career advisors to provide focused support for young people, helping them to fulfil their ambitions and preventing them being drawn into crime.
Savile Roberts.
Iawn Lefarydd, and Plaid Cymru too would like to pay tribute to Alex Salmond and Sir David Amess. Mr Speaker, 1 in 5 people in Wales is on an NHS waiting list. The Secretary of State for Wales says that a new cross-border NHS plan would bring down Welsh surgery waiting lists. But the First Minister of Wales, Labour, contradicts her. She denies it has anything to do with bringing down waiting lists. Are they making it up as they go along?
The difference is this: we now have a Westminster government that wants to work with the Welsh government to deliver for the people of Wales. For 14 long years, the Welsh government was in a position where the then government was in conflict with them. So now we will work together, collaborate, and ensure that together we deliver across Wales.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, join me in praising our Labour Police and Crime Commissioner for Cleveland, Matt Story, who's working with me to tackle knife crime, drug crime and antisocial behaviour in Stockton North, and assure my constituents that under this Labour government we'll see more police officers in Stockton and Billingham.
Well, I welcome his work with the new Labour Police and Crime Commissioner. And it's sad to say that in Cleveland, full-time equivalent police officers fell by over 12% under the last government. When you fail on the economy and growth, those are the types of things that happen across the country. As part of our neighbourhood policing guarantee, we'll put 13,000 more neighbourhood police and PCSOs back on our streets and ensure every community has a named local officer. Through our Safer Streets mission, we will tackle illegal drugs, half-knife crime and crack down on antisocial behaviour and go after the gangs that lure young people into violence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As evidenced by some earlier questions, issues surrounding SEND, local government finance and adult social care are issues which affect all of our constituents. And let's be honest, Mr Speaker, for too long, both parties have ducked and dodged taking the difficult but necessary decisions. In order to give certainty to our constituents and confidence to those who provide those vital services, does the Prime Minister share my assessment that there is considerable merit in formal cross-party working on these issues, where we can share taking those difficult decisions in order to improve outcomes for our constituents?
Well, I am grateful to him for raising this question about SEND, because it is a really important issue, and I think this is the 4th time in 2 Prime Minister's questions where it's been raised on both sides of the House. I quibble with his suggestion it's both parties, since his party was in power for 14 years. But the spirit in which he puts this forward, that this should be cross-party, is something that we should take up, because it's such an important issue. It affects so many children and parents, and therefore, notwithstanding the quibble, I'm very happy to work across the House on an issue as important as this.
Katrina Murray.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Fairways Networking Group, a group of small businesses in my constituency of Cumbernauld and Kirkintilloch, all operate on tight margins. Can my right honourable friend help me reassure this group that not only do they have nothing to fear from the Employment Rights Bill, but they have plenty to gain as exemplar employers?
Yes, the Employment Rights Bill is pro-worker and pro-growth, and proudly so. And I don't believe you can build a strong economy by having people in insecure work. The party opposite, they go against every protection for workers. They're against the minimum wage, they're against these new protections. But the vast majority of businesses, large and small, already know that investing in your human capital, treating people properly at work, is what produces growth. So here's the big political divide. They always oppose workers' rights. We will always champion them.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I associate the Green Party with his tributes to Alex Salmond and Sir David Amess? 99.7% of new patients in the east of England are unable to find an NHS dentist, the worst affected area in the country. My constituents in Waveney Valley want urgent action. So when will the government begin the critical negotiations on dental contract reform so no one in the 21st century has to pull out their own teeth? And will it be by the end of this year?
Well, he raises a really important issue because dentistry was left in a shocking state by the last government. I was shocked to hear that for children's hospitals, the commonest cause for admission for 6 to 10-year-olds in our children's hospitals in this country is to have teeth taken out because of the failure of the last government. That is shocking on any analysis. We will put that right, we will take the necessary steps, and we'll work across the House to do this as quickly as possible.
Can Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night in this House, we took the first steps in abolishing the hereditary principle of privilege. I was hosting the Let's End Poverty Coalition at a meeting upstairs where we heard that often for many who experience poverty, that feels hereditary too. So will the Prime Minister meet with me and those with lived experience of poverty to find ways in which we can hear from those with that lived experience to break that cycle of poverty?
She makes a good point. The party opposite, they want to get rid of maternity pay, but keep hereditary peers. It's the same old Tories. But, you know, the letters, this is an important issue that she's raised. The letters are honest, powerful and important. And I think they hold up a mirror to our country. We will deliver a budget that drives economic growth, improves the lives of working people, fixes our public services and rebuilds our country with a decade of national renewal.
Diolch Llefarydd. My constituent Jeanette Crawford suffers from ME and chronic pain. The cold, damp conditions of a Welsh winter are going to mean a lot more muscle soreness and fatigue for her. She's lost her winter fuel payments due to having a very small savings pot. With 86% of pensioners in poverty or just above that line to miss out in Wales, will the Prime Minister establish a social energy tariff to help people like Jeanette?
On this issue of winter fuel payments, we have inherited a £22 billion black card. They should be apologising, not groaning, for leaving the country in such a state. We are committed to the triple lock. The point about pensions is really important, and that means that the triple lock means that the pension will increase again by £460 next year, which means that pensioners under Labour will be better off because we're going to stabilise the economy after that lot lost control of it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Britain, the biggest killer of men under 50 is suicide. We have some of the worst paternity leave in Europe, and boys are 50% less likely than girls to pursue higher education. I know that my right honourable friend takes this very seriously, and his commitment on reducing suicide rates is very welcome. Can the Prime Minister update the House on this work, and does he agree with me that it is vital that we tackle these issues head-on because of the increasing alienation and mental health issues amongst young men?
I thank him for raising this vital issue. The statistics on male suicide are truly shocking. I went to an event just a few years ago here in this place where everyone in attendance was asked if they had lost someone to suicide, and I then reflected on my own experience, which was profound. As it was, I could see for everybody across the room, and will be across this House. So reducing deaths from suicide is a vital part of our health mission. We're recruiting an additional 8,500 mental health workers, specially trained to support people at risk of suicide, to provide faster treatment and ease pressure on our services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Group Captain Lizzie Nichol had an exemplary career with the RAF until she was forced to resign for refusing to implement illegal recruitment orders. Despite inquiry after inquiry vindicating Lizzie, on every count the RAF and MOD have failed to offer her fair compensation, and those responsible have walked away. Shamefully, during the purge inside her election period in what I believe was an attempt to subvert ministerial oversight, she was offered a derisory £2,000 by officials. I have documents proving beyond doubt that the former Chief of the Air Staff lied to the then Defence Secretary about her case. The Prime Minister says he believes in righting wrongs, so will he meet with Lizzie and help ensure that those responsible do not just walk away and that Lizzie gets the justice that she so very much deserves?
I thank her for raising what is obviously a very important case, and she's right to do so. I'm not across the individual details of it, but it obviously does need to be looked into, so we will commit to look into it, and I will make sure that she gets a meeting with the relevant minister to lay out such details as she has and to get some answers as to our inquiries.
Jake Richards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Children's social care in this country is now in crisis. Vulnerable children are regularly placed hundreds of miles from home, often in unregulated and unsafe accommodation. Meanwhile, private companies are making record profits on the backs of struggling and desperate local authorities. Frankly, this is an issue, a national scandal, that doesn't get enough attention. Today, Mr. Speaker, I'll be presenting my private member's bill, which will offer modest reform in this area, but will the Prime Minister reassure me and thousands of families across the country that it is a priority of his government to fix the social care crisis and our family courts?
Well, I thank him for raising this issue and being a champion on it. He is absolutely right about the appalling inheritance. 1 in 4 children in absolute poverty. That's a terrible inheritance. And too many vulnerable children in unregulated accommodation. Through our Children's Wellbeing Bill, we will put children and their well-being at the heart of education and social care systems. We'll also provide a home for all young care leavers to ensure that they're not homeless and remove the barriers to opportunity so every child can thrive in safe and loving homes.
Mr. Speaker, during the election campaign, the now Prime Minister made a hell of a lot of promises, some of which I'm sure he will remember. Of particular importance to my constituents in Andover, North West Hampshire, was a promise made on the 18th of June during a campaign visit to Basingstoke, when he made an unequivocal, unconditional commitment to rebuild our local hospital. Mr. Speaker, is this a promise on which we can rely?
Mr. Speaker, firstly, I'm grateful to him for raising this because it's obviously of huge importance to his constituents and his right to do so. We are reviewing, as he knows, the programme. The programme that the last government put in place for 40 new hospitals had a number of flaws. They weren't all hospitals, they weren't new, and they weren't funded, so we're reviewing it. But what I will no, but he's right to raise this, and I will make sure that he has a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss the particular development in his constituency. It will matter to his constituents who are listening to this, and it's important they know where the failure lay.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the government's historic investment in carbon capture and storage technology for Teesside and Merseyside. This week I've been at the sector's conference, and the feeling there is that this is a government delivering after years of delay. Will the Prime Minister recognise the unique potential that Teesside has for jobs, prosperity and economic growth into the future?
Yes, and Mr. Speaker, you will have observed that on Monday we had a very successful investment summit, £63 billion coming into this country, jobs in every part of the UK, and a very clear message from business that they were prepared to invest now under this new Labour government. Part of that was £22 billion commitment to CCUS, creating the first clusters in the world, including, as he points out, in the various parts of the country. So we'll support these jobs, we'll support these investment, we will grow our economy, rebuild our country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. North Cornwall is an amazing place to live and work, but a top-down approach from Westminster has failed us. Public services are chronically underfunded, young people forced to move away to pursue careers elsewhere, and affordable housing is a promise that's simply never kept. Will the Prime Minister meet with all 6 Cornish MPs to discuss devolution for Cornwall, with a Cornish Assembly that recognises our unique culture, language and national minority status, so we can finally unleash Cornwall's economic potential?
I'm grateful to member for raising this. I do believe in transferring power out of Westminster and into the hands of leaders who know their communities best. Those with skin in the game know what's best for their communities. We are already making steps in the South West by signing the devolution agreement for Devon and Torbay. Absolutely encourage local authorities to work with their neighbours to pursue deeper and wider devolution for their area, and I'll make sure that he has the meeting that he's asking for.
Final question, Blair McDougall.
As the Prime Minister works for a ceasefire and the return of the hostages, he'll have the support of people across this House. The Prime Minister will have noted the comments from the White House calling for urgent action to deal with the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and for the Netanyahu government to increase access to aid and to the amount of aid getting through. I wonder, does the Prime Minister agree with the comments from the White House and can he tell us what representations he is making on this matter?
Yes, I do agree with those remarks, and we are constantly making representations on this with our partners. There is an urgent need, and has been now for a very long time, for more aid to get into Gaza. It's a desperate situation, and Israel must comply with its international humanitarian law obligations, and that is why we are convening a session of the UK Security, of the UN Security Council with others to address this issue.
Right, that completes Prime Minister's question. I'll just let the front benches clear a bit.
That was Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer taking questions from MPs in the House of Commons, including what we think are the second-to-last questions from Rishi Sunak as leader of the opposition before he stands down to be replaced by Kenny Bagnott or Robert Jenrick. Now, we're still joined in the studio here by Labour MP for Plymouth Moor View, Fred Thomas, and Shadow Leader of the House of Commons, Chris Philp.
And you have been sending in your questions to us for our panel because, as ever, it's all about you on the show. We've got them all here. Keep them coming, by the way. Keep those questions coming in. Tell us where you're from. Give us a name. We want to all feel part of this process.
That's right, gbnews.com/yoursay for your questions. But first, we have one here from Max. And to you first, Fred. In view of Meloni's deal, that's the Italian Premier's deal with Albania, do you wish, your party wish, you hadn't scrapped the Tory party's Rwanda deal on the first day in office? Give it a chance to work.
No, not at all. I mean, I think the first thing to say is that it's absolutely tragic that people are still losing their lives in the Channel. It's devastating to see, and we have to do everything we can to stop this. And what we are doing to do that is finally, as a country, after years of inaction, going after these evil gangs who are profiting, making so much money, by the way, by shipping people over into our country. It's absolutely abhorrent. We can stop them. Of course we can. I'm hugely patriotic and I'm proud of our security services.
It's not working though, is it? I mean,
we have barely started. If I can tell you, Christopher, how we're doing to do it, we've commenced already with recruiting 100 specialist investigators. We've announced up to £75 million for new surveillance technology, and we've appointed a new border security commander, Martin Hewitt, who's got the experience to deliver this. And our move is to go after these gangs upstream in the countries they're operating from and stop them doing what they're doing at the moment, which is shipping people over to our country. The Rwanda scheme was never going to work, cost millions of pounds, didn't deliver anything, and it's not something we need to go back to. And frankly, from speaking to people on the doors over the last year all over the country, cross-party support, no one really believed in the Rwanda deal.
Chris Philp from the Conservatives. You made a hash of it. You said you'd stop the votes. You didn't. Labour say they are going to stop the votes and sort this crisis out.
Well, it's definitely one of the reasons why we lost, that we didn't stop the boats, as Rishi Sunak promised to do. But the Rwanda scheme, I believe, would have had the deterrent effect required and would have stopped the boats.
Hang on a minute. Isn't losing your life by coming in on a small boat, isn't that what more of a deterrent can anyone have?
Tragically, people do seem to be willing to cross the Channel still, despite those risks. Those risks exist. People have tragically lost their life, but they're still trying to cross. Now, the Rwanda scheme was due to come into force on the 24th of July, about 3 weeks after the election. That was when the first flight was due to take off, and Labour cancelled it. Now, I'm confident the deterrent effect would have worked and would have stopped the boats. And the reason I say that is because Australia tried something similar around about 10 years ago. They called it Operation Sovereign Borders. They used Nauru, which is an island in the Pacific, rather than Rwanda, but it worked. And their illegal maritime arrivals in Australia went from about 50,000 a year down to 0 within 6 months. So had Labour had Labour implemented the Rwanda plan, as the Conservatives would have done, on July the 24th, these crossings would have been stopped. Now, what's actually happened is they've continued in very large numbers. We had a day a couple of weeks ago when nearly 1,000 people crossed on one day alone. People are tragically losing their lives. And this idea that, oh, we'll go after the gangs, that'll fix it. Now, of course, I support going after the gangs, but the previous government, under successive Home Secretaries, was going after the gangs. There was work being done in France, Belgium, Germany, all the way through to Turkey and beyond. And that alone is not enough. We need more. You need a deterrent, and that is what the Rwanda scheme would have provided.
It's not working, Fred. 135 people a day crossing the first 100 days of your government.
Look, it's good to hear that Chris supports going after the gangs, because that is what we need to do. It's what we haven't been doing.
Hang on, yes, we had. No, Fred, we had. Fred,
as Home Office Minister. But the other thing I need to come back on, Chris, that you said, is you spoke about it being a deterrent.
I got the weekly reports.
Can I just respond to you saying that it was a deterrent? Because
I need to go to what you just said. It's not true we weren't going after it.
Coming to this country is actually not going to happen. This is a fantastic country, the United Kingdom. People want to come here. Now, the idea that you're going to be able to send a very small percentage of them over to a different country is not going to deter the fact that they're desperate to get here. So either we do one thing, which I've heard some MPs suggest from a different party, which is to make this a less good place to live, which I don't think we should do. I think we need to keep making this country a fantastic place to live. Or we accept that this is a great country to live in and people are going to want to come here, and we need to stop the gangs who are achieving the smuggling and getting people into this country.
Look, first of all, the idea that the gangs weren't being gone after before is, completely ridiculous. I mean, as Police Minister, I used to get the weekly letter from the Director-General of the National Crime Agency, and about a quarter to a third of the top jobs the NCA were doing were anti-organised immigration crime. So there's been an organised programme going after the gangs for about the last 4 years. Right, so don't claim that it wasn't
not a very good one, Chris.
And, I've seen no improvement since Labour's come to office. And then secondly, on the deterrent point, the purpose of the deterrent, you don't need to take 50,000 people to Rwanda. If you start doing it within a matter of a few weeks or a couple of months, the deterrent effect stops people. Now, that's not speculative. We saw it happen with Australia. Australia only sent 2,000 or 3,000 people to Nauru, and it stopped the illegal maritime arrivals, as they called it, in their entirety. We did a similar thing with Albania. 2 years ago, the Albanians were the biggest cohort crossing the channel. We did a returns deal with Albania, and the numbers fell by 93%. So there is very clear evidence that a deterrent works, and it's terrible, it's negligent that the Labour government have scrapped the scheme before it even started.
OK, Fred, what I was interested in, amongst that brilliant exchange of views, is when you said it comes up on the doorsteps, that people in your constituency are incredibly concerned about it.
Absolutely.
Now, people across the country, they've put their faith in the Labour Party. You've got this massive majority, but really, how long do you think you have until that faith diminishes, until you have to show, actually, the numbers are coming down? It's tough, isn't it? But people expect to see change, and change was the platform that you stood on.
100%. I completely agree. And if we do not change things, then we deserve to go. Just like the Conservatives didn't change things and they deserve to go. It's been a really interesting time for all of us, new MPs. It's been very short. I think we've had 13 weeks, is it? So, we've had very little time. Well, I think what was really interesting for me was this last weekend I was out in Plymouth Moorview, where I represent, and I was knocking on doors, talking to residents. And actually, the positivity was overwhelming. And what we might have thought with people saying, where's the change already? Our message is change is beginning. Change is beginning. We're just getting into government. We've got a budget coming up. We're already taking steps that I've laid out, particularly we're talking about immigration. So taking bold new steps, recruiting new specialist officers. And talking about that topic with people in Plymouth was really encouraging.
How long have you got to get results on small boats? I mean, that's the question that Joy's asking. When can we start saying, well, it's failing?
It can't be soon enough for me, because, like I said at the beginning, every single death in the Channel is a tragedy. Every single person to this country who we're then putting up and having to deal with their asylum and processing that is a tragedy for the taxpayer. So this has to end, this situation, and we're working as hard as we can.
You mentioned the budget there. David's emailed in. David, please say where you're from. We want to know where you're from, David, and it'd be great to hear from you anyway. How much of any increase in employer contributions in the budget you referred to there in 2 weeks' time will be paid for by the public sector workforce? So employers' share will pile up more cost on the state, and you're simply this extra subsidy from the taxpayer. Is it affordable?
Right. I think it's firstly, David is a public sector worker, you described that, and I think it's really, really fantastic news for public sector workers, so many of whom have been taking industrial action over the last couple of years, that this Labour government have come in and immediately resolved those issues, and so the country's getting going again.
It was pricey.
It's an important step, and anyone who takes the train, anyone who goes to hospital and requires nurses, doctors, the fact that these people are now being paid properly, and by the way, only in line with what they should have been paid for the last 10 years. But national insurance is going up. It's fantastic news.
National insurance looks like it's going to go up. The employer contributions will hit many companies. When Chris Philp, will that be that'll bear heavily on employers and also maybe on people's pay packets?
Yeah, I'm afraid it will. I mean, Labour have broken a categoric manifesto commitment. It said in black and white, we're not going to put up national insurance, and it looks like they're now going to do that. And I was speaking to someone earlier today on a radio phone-in who said he's actually going to close his business down and leave the country as a result of the tax rises that Labour are contemplating and the increases in regulation. It's really bad for business. It's bad for workers. The OBR found a couple of years ago that 80% of this tax rise will end up coming out of workers' pockets. And actually, it may end up raising less tax if people shut down businesses and move abroad as a result. It's a really worrying trend.
Is there a danger for the Conservatives in opposing cuts like the winter fuel payment, opposing tax rises, ways of getting in more cash to the exchequer like you're doing on employer contributions, national insurance contributions? Is there a danger that people go, hang on, these are not serious people? They are the people who are now the magic money tree, while the Labour government is taking the tough decisions for the future. How careful do you have to be on that?
Well, I mean, there are some increases in expenditure, we don't support. So giving train drivers who already earn £65,000 a year a £10,000 pay increase without any sort of improvements to working practices in exchange, while at the same time slashing winter fuel payments from pensioners who are in poverty, we think that's the wrong set of priorities. So I think that's pretty clear. And look, putting up taxes too far ends up actually getting less money to the exchequer, because if businesses close down or they don't hire extra staff...
We used to make this point in 2010 to 2015 under austerity, but yeah, it's interesting that you make that point now.
Yeah,
we're seeing evidence of it happening. I was talking to a guy on a radio phone-in just today who's going to sell up his business and move out of the country because of the tax increases that Labour are planning and the increases in regulation. And that should concern all of us. It should concern all of us.
Fred, there's a big risk here, and Chris Philp setting out there. Just while you're talking about the winter fuel payment, Joan has emailed. Please say where you're from, Joan. She's a 73-year-old pensioner, lost her husband 3 years ago, and was not eligible for the winter fuel payment. She wants to know how much security was put in place for Taylor Swift, what the cost of that was. This is the blue light escort to the concert. Keir Starmer met the pop star afterwards. Is that damaging the Taylor Swift row?
Well, I mean, I'm sorry to hear about Joan's situation and her partner passing away. As for Taylor Swift, this was a security operation. Police decisions were made, as far as I'm aware. You've got to contextualise this, that Taylor Swift's tour had been under security concerns previously, as far as I understand it.
In a different country.
She had a gig cancelled. And then, of course, the three young girls who tragically lost their lives in Southport were at a Taylor Swift-related dance class. So there were concerns around this, as far as I'm aware. I don't have the inside track on the operational decisions that were taken, and I think it's appropriate to leave those operational decisions for the police.
Looks bad, though, maybe? Meeting Taylor Swift and, a blue light escort? I mean, Chris Philp, you're former Home Office Minister.
Yeah, so my understanding is the police independently assessed the security risk and decided that an escort was not required. Subsequent to that, the reporting suggests that the Home Secretary and the Attorney General then put pressure on the police, which they then responded to. At the same time,
it is ridiculous to suggest in order to get free tickets they blew... I mean, what is the suggestion? What is the suggestion? Why would they have intervened
Well, you'd have to ask them that, but it sounds, from what I understand the reporting to be, the police looked at it, decided operationally no security was required. The Home Secretary and the Attorney General, strangely, then put pressure on the police, who changed their mind. That's what seems to have happened.
Pressure, though? They would deny there's any pressure put on the police to do anything there.
Well, they initially denied there was any contact. Then it turns out there was contact from multiple people. Apparently Sue Gray was involved somehow. It's all extremely murky, and they should come clean about what happened. And it looks pretty bad. I'm not saying there's a link, but it looks pretty bad that both Yvette Cooper, via her husband, and Keir Starmer, of course, were busy taking freebies. I mean, there's no freebie that comes up that Keir Starmer doesn't try and get his hands on. It's over £100,000.
They have, as far as I'm aware, paid that particular sum of money.
They have, since the election, they've paid all.
So what? No, not all of it. He's paid a bit of it back. He's paid 6,000. He's paid 6,000 out of 107,000. He hasn't even paid all of the freebies back since the election. He's paid back some of them.
I think that. Firstly, on the Taylor Swift thing, so listening to Chris talking about what was reported, so these are things that may or may not have happened. We don't have the inside track. Operational decisions were taken. But when we start hearing from former Conservative ministers criticising about gifts being taken, it just does, I think, strike a chord with a lot of people who I speak to in the constituency around the country who think, hang on, are you being serious? This is the party who gave out so much public money, millions and millions of pounds in dodgy PPE contracts to their mates. This is the party of Boris Johnson, who I think Chris served under, having Partygate parties where we were all on lockdown during COVID, and they were busy living it up in Number 10. And you talk about trust in politicians. You talk about honesty, and I'm learning this now as a new politician. Yeah. It's been destroyed by Chris's party, so I think it just requires a little bit of context.
Well, hang on a minute. I mean, there has been a lot of hospitality and a lot of freebies. Nobody's denying that. But it's difficult for you as a new MP. I mean, I'm sure there'll be tiny violins. But I actually feel for you because, I put my hand up. I had some good nights out at the Brits.
What was your favourite one? The Brits?
Brits. I mean, I saw Madonna at the Brits. I mean, I wouldn't have got that invite. I put my hands up. But I actually feel for you because I'm guessing when you get offered something nice, you'll be like, oh, gosh. I don't think I would have taken it in this context, which is a great shame.
I think the key thing for me is absolutely transparency. Yeah. It's obeying the rules and it's registering your interest, and that's what I want to see everyone doing. That's what Keir Starmer's done. The other key principle for me is not wasting public money. So that is something that happened under the last Conservative government. So much money going out under COVID, which became a sort of ridiculous, lucrative opportunity. If you were friends with Conservative ministers, you basically got handed these huge contracts to deliver what turned out to be extremely dodgy.
Just to finish, I think the issue Keir Starmer has, to be honest, is one of hypocrisy, because he was, during the whole Boris Johnson saga, which he referred to, and I actually resigned as a minister in his government in protest at that, Keir Starmer was sort of presenting himself as this sort of paragon of moral virtue. Now it turns out he's loading up on freebies from Lord Ali, giving out passes to Lord Ali, jobs to Labour Party donors in the civil service. So I think it's a hypocrisy that is so damaging for Keir Starmer.
Chris, in fact, I'm going to take a step back and look at the wider context of politics away from Westminster. Gary from Portsmouth has asked, of all the multitude of questions that could have been asked on Labour's failures and missteps, Rishi Sunak fell completely short by not asking about the current and appropriate questions. He talked only about China for 6 questions. A very poor performance, says Gary. About Rishi Sunak, it's his penultimate PMQs. The next one he'll do is before the budget, when we won't be here to talk about it. We'll be straight into the budget. So it's our last chance to probably talk about Rishi Sunak on this programme. And you are selecting a new leader. There's a GBNews debate tomorrow night, a leadership event.
Hosted by an amazing gentleman.
I may be missing it. Kevin Badenoch is there, of course, from Robert Jenrick. How will history judge Rishi Sunak?
Well, that's a really good question. And I guess you don't really get a sense of history for a while. Someone once famously said, asked in the 1950s about the French Revolution, he said, it's too early to say.
Yes.
So I think Rishi Sunak, his reputation will be as a really decent man who did a decent job, a difficult job, in circumstances that were quite challenging. Challenging not just in this country, dealing with the aftermath of COVID and high inflation, but actually challenging around the Western world. So I think he'll be remembered as a decent, hard-working, sincere leader who did his best in tough circumstances.
And you're backing Kemi to be the next Conservative Party leader. What's wrong with Robert Jenrick, out of interest?
Nothing wrong with Robert Jenrick at all. He's a friend, he's a colleague. I've got every
I bet he's not your
respect
mate
for him.
anymore. We know about these leadership elections.
Look, if he wins, he'll have my full support. But I am backing Kemi because I think she has the energy, the ideas. I think she can cut through with the public, and of course in opposition, particularly once we're through this contest, it's quite hard to have your voice heard in opposition. And I think Kemi has a way of getting through to the public, which very few politicians have. And she's got some authentically conservative ideas. She's brave as well. She takes on orthodoxies, and that's why Kemi has my support.
And Fred, I'm sure you'll be watching GB News tomorrow night with this key debate. Who does Labour fear the most, Kemi Badenoch or Robert Jenrick?
I'm personally not following it too closely, the opposition leadership race. What's interesting, I found, is that from all the candidates so far, what we've not heard from any one of them is putting their hand up and saying, we got things wrong. There's a reason we lost a landslide election. There's a reason things are so bad for the party at the moment, and this is a vision for the future. We're not hearing that from any of them. And that's been most interesting to me, because what happened with Labour when we lost in 2019, in 2020, Keir Starmer came in and said, right, we need to change the party. We need to listen to people, and we need to do things differently. So far, from these potential leaders, any of them, we're not hearing that at all. So
do you think the one chosen will take the party into the next election, or will they select again?
I have no idea. I wouldn't want to comment on that. Chris will be the expert.
Chris?
No, I think whoever is elected in a few weeks' time, the party will unite behind them, and of course they will fight and win the next election.
Okay,
this Labour government, this Labour government already has. This Labour government already has. I mean, Keir Starmer's got a minus 36% poll rating.
Brilliant.
We've got one more question. Shall I ask it about football? OK, it's about football. Now, Keir Starmer welcomed the new Thomas Tuchel as the new England manager. Press conference on GB News shortly from the FA. One of the viewers has asked, not given their name, surely what the best person for the job? Andrew Pearce and others are saying it should be an English manager. I think Nigel Farage too, not a German one. What's your take on that?
Well, I'm not sure I'm going to take a lot of football advice from Andrew, much though I love him. As far as I'm concerned, as an England fan, I just want us to do well. We lost to Greece just a few days ago, which wasn't great. So whoever is the best person for the job, I will get behind them. Just like the Tory party leadership.
That's exactly what the viewer says, the best person for the job. Do you agree?
Completely agree. The most important thing is we get over the line and win something now with this amazing generation of players. And the fact that we've got a German manager, to me, doesn't matter too much. My concern was that Wayne Rooney is the manager of Plymouth Argyle at the moment, and we're doing fantastically mid-table in the Championship.
Thank you, Fred. Now, coming up is Good Afternoon Britain with Tom and Emily. What have you got on show, briefly?
Show today, a new story for you. It turns out that Keir Starmer may have stacked the so-called impartial civil service with over 200 cronies and allies. Is this another example of cronyism at the top?
And are the number of migrant hotels actually increasing now, despite a promise to get them down? All to come.
We'll be watching you, Tom and Emily. Thanks very much indeed. You have been watching or listening to PMQs Live with Gloria Di Piero and Chris Hope. Don't go anywhere, because up next it's Good Afternoon Britain with Tom and Emily. See you next week.
Tune in.
Tomorrow.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed boilers. Sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. It's quite warm, it's quite humid, but for quite a few of us, it's a very wet Wednesday. We've got low pressure sitting just to the west of the UK, high pressure to the east, generating southerly winds. And these southerly winds are bringing the warmth, but they're also bringing the moisture, and these weather fronts providing some fairly heavy downpours through this afternoon, particularly over parts of northern England, but continuing to stay pretty soggy over Wales and southwest England. Some heavy showers here, and parts of eastern Scotland also looking pretty wet with the winds coming in from the sea here. We'll see some dry conditions for Northern Ireland and northern Scotland, and much of eastern England having a fine day. Really quite warm here with a bit of brightness. 21, maybe even 22 degrees Celsius, and even where it's raining, it is warm and it is humid. But further pulses of heavy rain will drift northwards across southern England and South Wales into this evening. So not very clever for this evening's rush hour. Again, the M5, the M4, and even further north. Although the rain may ease for a time over northern England, there will be further showers here and across central and southern Scotland. As we go through the night, we'll start to see all this rain slowly working eastwards. So after a dry day, it will turn into a wet night. Still some heavy pulses of rain, particularly over northern England. So again, not clever on the roads here. A lot of spray, a lot of surface water around, even the potential for some flooding as that rain slowly moves northwards across Scotland, clearing away from East Anglia and the southeast. Much clearer conditions by dawn over Wales and southwest England. Another pretty warm night with temperatures in many places staying in the teens. Tomorrow starts pretty glum over eastern England and much of Scotland, but the rain will slowly peter out, taking most of the morning before it clears away from the mainland of Scotland, staying soggy in Shetland, but generally cheering up tomorrow. A brighter day, a fresher day. There'll be a sprinkling of showers in the west, but many places seeing some sunny spells. Not as warm, but still quite mild for October.
Despite the morning rain, it'll be a nice, warm, cosy day ahead. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's only 2 weeks remaining to grab your chance to win a whopping £36,000 cash in the Great British Giveaway. That's like having £3,000 each month for an entire year. Extra cash in your bank account that you can do whatever you like with. Take a year off and keep it to yourself. You don't even need to tell the taxman, as it's totally tax-free. For another chance to win £36,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text BONUS to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB08, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 25th of October. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Britain's Newsroom. Weekday mornings from 9:30.
We shouldn't have to do this, Rebecca. These men should have been compensated long ago.
They shouldn't have to fight for recognition. And this is what's happened over the last 72 years. So all the way through from the test through to the present day, they've known that something happened to them. They've seen what they've been through, their medical conditions, the fact that many of these servicemen died well before their time. And they were ignored in a way that other countries didn't ignore their similar testing veterans. So other nuclear powers across the world, the US, for example, compensated and recognised their nuclear testing veterans many, many years ago. Yet, unfortunately, successive governments in the UK failed to do that. After the long campaign for medallic recognition, finally, these servicemen received medallic recognition, but it came in a jiffy bag in the post, which is not the way to honour the service that these men gave to our country. There needs to be an understanding and an uncovering of the truth of what they actually went through. They've been fighting for many years for access to their medical records, for example, urine and blood tests that they know were taken during their service. But when many of these families have tried to access their records, these test results seem to be missing, and there's no explanation as to why this has happened.
What basis does the Ministry of Defence say it's not our responsibility?
Well, we know from other studies across the world and subsequent studies, it showed, staggeringly, that these men were exposed to the same amount of radiation as clean-up workers at Chernobyl.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Wednesday, the 16th of October. I'm Emily Carver.
And I'm Tom Harwood.
Migrant hotel farce. Another U-turn from a government elected on a promise to shut down migrant hotels. But now it's revealed the Home Office is actively looking to requisition